In this video, I'll talk about the second Pogge reading. This is the reading about um, life-saving medicine, and that will tie up or finish our section on distributive justice. So, if you remember from the first Pogge reading, it's part of Pogge's argument that the international system, the economic system, is unjust. And it's unjust because it actively harms people in the third world, in the developing world. So this chapter looks at a particular example of that, and that's the TRIPS agreement, or more accurately, the international agreements that by which countries agree to uphold um, intellectual property across the world. So that includes patents over medicine. And so Pogge's question is that justified? Is that his answer is of course no, because he thinks this actually is a harmful system. So he offers a proposal for how to solve this, or how to make this actually work better. And so the way he goes about it is he says, well, why might you think that patents are a good idea? One is a natural rights argument. The second is a more popular justification that appeals to beneficial consequences, basically stimulating research and development of these medicines, and then offers his own alternative. So the arguments we'll look at is actually, I'm going to skip the natural rights argument. It's relatively straightforward, and you can see how Pogge discusses that. The little more interesting is the consequential or the beneficial consequences argument, and then point out what Pogge thinks is the problem, and then look at his own proposal. So remember, right, here's the background to Pogge's argument. He thinks the international economics order is such that it really harms people, and that makes it unjustified. The TRIPS agreement about patents is a part of this. This significantly harms people by preventing them from accessing potentially life-saving medicines. Think about like medication to prevent or cure malaria or something. The idea here is that the actual production cost of these type of medicines are very low. So what it costs to actually make a pill is not very much. But these pills are patent protected, and so the holder of the patent can then charge much more than just the little bit that it would cost to make the pill. And so these pills can be too expensive, especially for people in the developing world, and that's a problem that Pogge looks at. In a moment, we'll look at why you might think that it's a good idea that people might overcharge, but it is true that they can overcharge as a result of a patent. If there was no patent and anyone could sell it, you'd have a much more competitive market, the prices would drop, and the pill would become cheaper. But in a patent, you can't have competition because only the patent holder can sell the drug, and so no competition is there, and they can charge higher prices. They basically have a monopoly. All right, so he thinks this means the TRIPS agreement is unjustified. The Western citizens, they support the TRIPS by maintaining the legal order. And of course he thinks, if you do that, then you can be justly taxed to help rectify the injustice. And his own health impact fund is an alternative that he thinks can be supported through taxes because we are supporting the current harmful system. So here are the two main claims, right? So there's an argument about the TRIPS agreement actually significantly harming the world's poor, and then there is the claim that his own proposal would actually rectify this injustice. So how does the TRIPS agreement, how do patents harm the poor? Well, think about what the problem of intellectual goods is, right? It's inventions, in this case, discoveries. This is the thing I just mentioned, right? So the cost of producing each pill is very cheap, except for the very first pill. So the very first pill is really, really expensive because it's only really cheap to make the pills once you've invented the medicine, tested it, made sure it's safe, it works, and so on. But all that work is a lot of work. It's a lot of work in the sense that you need to have laboratories, to have to spend a lot of time to do research. Then once you think you have it, then you have to go through very elaborate testing procedures. Then you have to get it cleared by the FDA and so on. This is a billions dollar industry for a reason. It's really expensive, but that's all the way to get to that very first pill that you can sell. Once you're selling, every next pills cost something like a couple of cents a pill. Now the conveyor belts are running, and you just spit them out. Similar to a book, right? Like you write the book, the very first copy of the book is really hard because you have to do all the thinking and all the writing and so on. But then once you've written it, you can basically print them off for nearly free. So this creates a dilemma, right? So two horns to the dilemma. One horn. Let's say that if you just charge the marginal cost of production, right? So that is the cost of that unit, that particular unit. Right? Well, then no one will buy the first one because the first one will cost billions of dollars. Right? Everyone will wait to buy the second, the third, fourth, fifth, sixth, and to the nth unit because those will only be a couple of cents. But of course, the problem is like this is not exactly an option, right? So if nobody buys the first unit, then the first unit won't actually be produced. And so if you charge only marginal cost, then the first unit would actually not be produced at all. If the first unit isn't produced, then the second and the third also aren't produced either because they come after the first. And so if you charge marginal cost, then no intellectual goods, no inventions are really produced. And that's the problem with if you have no patent, people say, who believe in this argument. The argument goes, and like, look, if you just have a competitive market that charges, competitive market in which everyone can sell the good, people are going to sell it for just what it takes to make it plus a little profit, and that's going to be really cheap. And that includes now the inventor also can only charge that. But if the inventor can also only charge that, then the inventor can never recover his or her cost of inventing it because that first one was super expensive and you can never charge that much money. So patents, copyright, all these other types of intellectual property, they are part of a standard solution for this. So they allow the inventor to charge pretty much what they want over all the units. And so now they can recover their cost. So instead of 3 cents per pill, they charge $30 or something, right? Or like $10. You go to the pharmacy and your doctor prescribes you some medicine. Sometimes the medicine costs like a little jar costs $3. Sometimes it costs $35. The difference is the $3 is the generic version, generic version is available when the patent is no longer in play. But if you pay the expensive one, that's when you're dealing with a producer who's still trying to recover the cost of invention. So the standard idea is you give a patent that's a monopoly for a number of years. And for a number of years, this producer can charge a high price for the medicine, recover all the billions of dollars they had to spend on inventing and approving it. And then after that, it lapses. And now you get an open market that is just generic based. And so you get widely available more and more over the years cheap medicine, but also new medicine invented. That's the idea. Well, anyway, if you don't do that, then you're in this first horn, right? Like if you don't do that, you don't have any patents, then it looks like nobody will produce new medicine. And here's two graphs where you can see how this would go, right? So on the right, you have perfect competition, which means the marginal cost curve, which goes from bottom left to top right, intersects with the price exactly at a certain quantity, right? And so the idea being here, the price of the goods is exactly the same to the marginal cost. So whatever it costs to make the pill, that's what you get to charge. On the left, however, you have a monopoly price, right? So the monopoly price is greater than the actual marginal cost. And so since the price is higher, you can see this here, the price is higher, you have fewer things sold, but at a higher price, which means the seller is making excess profits. And the idea is, of course, that the seller will buy, even though they sell a little less, they can charge so much more that overall they are better off. So here's your second form of the dilemma, right? And this is the part that Pogge is um, seizing on. Let's say that you have a patent over an intellectual good, then you will likely sell it at a very high cost. Right? That's the whole point. But if it's sold at a very high cost, at a high price, then people who could have accessed people could have accessed that good at a lower cost won't actually be able to access it. They won't be able to afford it. So if producers have a patent over things like life-saving medicine, then there will be a number of people, potentially lots of people, who could have accessed that at a lower cost, but who will not be able to access them at the current cost. Of course, the poor are the first ones who will not be able to afford it anymore. That is what it means to be poor. And so then it follows that patents harm the poor. And that was Pogge's claim, right? So he thinks this is an actual harm that's being imposed. Here's a quick question to keep in mind. Notice that the premise talks about not having access, right? And the conclusion talks about harm. And Pogge does need harm. Question is these the same things? Is not having access the absence of a benefit, or is it an actual harm? All right. Set that point aside for a moment. Maybe there is no actual harm. Or maybe he doesn't need to show that there's an actual harm. He does have a real point. Right? Whether or not you accept this, think about it. Think about adding the following idea. Suppose we add 5, right? Companies that work for profit have an incentive to research and develop medicines that people will buy. That's what the market does, right? But the poor cannot afford potentially life-saving medicines, then the companies won't really have the incentives to research and develop those medicines either. And so now it seems that patents do not give companies much incentive to research and develop medicines that will actually help the poor who are dying. And that seems kind of a messed up system. Right? What you get is you have lots of incentives to invent medicines that will help like rich women in Hollywood to fight their wrinkles because they're sitting on millions and millions of dollars. But the millions of people who are suffering from cholera or malaria or whatever, they might never see a new medicine that actually solves their much greater misery. So that's his critique of the patents, right? And there seems to be something to this. That seems a messed up situation. Of course, the question is, do we have anything better, right? And so Pogge thinks he does. Calls this the Health Impact Fund, right? This is what the proposal consists of. 3 elements. 1, open access. So no longer like a patent where you get restrictions, but open access. It's like an open source software, right? Like anyone, as soon as it's invented, it becomes openly available for anyone to look at the recipe, and they can just start selling that pill. And under competition, that means these things will become available very cheaply. Of course, it still has to be paid for, right? And so Pogge suggests a different way of paying, and with a different way of paying, you get different incentives. So to avoid the first horn problem, where nobody will actually produce a new medicine anymore, companies will be paid on the actual health impact of their products. That's what he calls a pool solution. So the idea is you don't get paid in terms of how much customers can afford to buy your medicine, but you get paid in terms of how much your medicine actually makes a difference to global health. Pogge says this is actually a good idea because it not just incentivizes companies to produce it, but actually incentivizes them to deliver it. And if you have an incentive to deliver, maybe let's say that there's a remote area somewhere in Africa where people are really dying a lot from malaria. If you can get your medicine there, you stand to make a lot of money. So maybe you build a road just to get your trucks there, and now there's this sort of added spillover effect. Now there's roads there too. So third, funding. So there's the Health Impact Fund, which is financed out of taxes worldwide, and basically to the extent that companies make positive impact on global health, they're going to get paid out of that Health Impact Fund. Now, Pogge doesn't want to force everyone to buy this. He doesn't want to abolish the patent system. He just wants to create this additional options, different track. So a company could still do what they're doing now, or they could go for his option and then presumably start start a marketing campaign and look at us being all ethical and stuff, and just opt in and then saying, to the extent that we're making a real big difference for health, and we're making health, medicine freely available. He also says, let's do it only for essential medicine, so Botox and so on can still be patent protected. He doesn't really care about that. What he cares about is the medicine that would save lives in the developing world. All right, here's two possible worries. So that's the overview of the argument, the problem with patents, and his own preferred solution. Here's one possible worry. You might have a worry about measuring, right? How easy is it to figure out what contribution the drug makes to health improvement? We see health improvements, we see problems of health all over the world, but the causes of these are very complicated. For instance, what might happen is that a certain medicine has a very positive impact on a disease, but at the same time the environment worsens, so that the positive impact is actually cancelled out. In those cases, the positive impact might be lost. Or the other way around, there might be no positive impact, but the environment improves, and so there seems to be a great impact, but actually wasn't any of the medicines doing. In each of those scenarios, we're going to get either payment or non-payment that doesn't really reflect what Pogge is after. And this is a worry about how we can attribute these health impacts to even classes of drugs, let alone individual medicine. And that's central to the proposal, of course. Let's set that aside. Maybe that can be overcome. Here's the second possible worry. Are there any unintended consequences? What other things might happen if you start changing the system like Pogge wants? One is that companies might start looking not to actually have the biggest impact, but to be seen to have the biggest impact. So maybe they start looking at places where the environment is actually producing, and then quickly deliver some of their medicine there, even though the medicine isn't really needed, and then point to the improving health there to get paid. That would be as bad, maybe even worse than what we have right now. Further question, what about health statistics? Right? So health statistics are very difficult to compile, especially in very poor areas where it's difficult to work. Once we start giving companies a stake in what the health statistics say, direct stake in the sense that they're getting paid on the basis of these, it's quite likely that these statistics are going to get much more unreliable, much less reliable. It's not hard to imagine the kind of corrupting influence that might have. Now you might think, well, big deal, who cares about statistics? Well, those type of health statistics are major elements of government policies for public health and development and so on. So that seems like a big deal. The economist Angus Deaton, who won the Nobel Prize last year, has a very, very interesting book called The Great Escape on development. And he discusses Pogge's proposal fairly critically, and he makes some of these points, not all of them, but some of these points there. So page 320 is where you can find that. All right, that's pretty much it. So hope you find this helpful.